Welcome to the Dispense Magazine podcast with news and information about medical cannabis. We talk about the things you and your doctor might talk about. I'm your host, Sven Hosford. In this episode, we visit a recent Dispense with a Nonsense event in Harmony, Pennsylvania. This is part 2 of a discussion on cannabis and mental health, and we'll hear from Diana Heilman-Briggs, founder of PA Compassionate Caregivers, along with Dr. John Metcalf and Sara Makin, and questions from the audience. Recorded live on September 15th, 2018.
Let's talk to our third panelist, our fill-in for today. Diana, you're on the front edge. I mean, you're on the leading edge of this. You're a caregiver for how many people right now?
Currently 2.
Currently 2, okay. But you're also manage some volunteers who are caregivers for other people. Talk a little bit about what caregiver means in Pennsylvania and how that whole program works.
Okay, under our law in Pennsylvania, a caregiver can have up to 5 patients. In my case, I have a son who is disabled, suffers from intractable epilepsy, so he does not have the ability, even though he just turned 18, to go into a dispensary on his own. So I had to become the caregiver. I of course, am his mode of getting his medicine. In our state, you cannot walk into a dispensary without a caregiver card or a patient card under our program. Most won't let you in even if you're pushing a loved one in a wheelchair. It's just not allowed. So we found the need after I became the caregiver for my son. There were many people left out, and as we all know, part of the aspect of our program requires a federal background check and federal fingerprinting for the caregivers. The federal government doesn't go quickly for anybody. When I first signed up back in December, it took me a month and a half for that review process to take place. It is happening a little quicker now at about a 2-week range. But PACC was started because I received phone calls from people who had loved ones who were sick and needed the medicine, and yet they were just starting the caregiver process. I didn't even understand the need, but of course I had a card that had 4 more slots available on it. And at that point, we decided this is something that we needed to do, especially for a homebound patient or someone who, I've had many calls from the elderly community that weren't sure how to bring up the conversation with their own children or their doctors. They knew they wanted this medicine, and it's just safer for them to call me and ask me to be their caregiver so that they didn't have to maybe discuss that with their own family right away. And that's what we do. We then go to the dispensary, talk to the pharmacist about our current patient, their illnesses, what their needs are, and then we transport the medicine to them legally.
So just to reiterate then, it sounds like the program started out largely to help protect the children who, because they were under 18, could not go in to purchase their own, even if they could get out of the wheelchair. But then in practice, it sounds like, and especially because Pennsylvania now has terminal illness as one of the qualifying conditions, it sounds like you're doing as much or more with the end-of-life issues. Is that true?
That seems to be where most of my calls come from right now, as difficult as that is. Bear with me. My mother became my second patient on my caregiver card when back in April of this year, she was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. I was so grateful, not at the time, but I became grateful that it only took me 3 days to make my mother a patient under the program and to get her medicine and to start her pain-free journey, which her last 2 months of life, she was pain-free due to her cannabis use.
Talk some about some of the happy things that happened. Talk about how it has really helped elevate her mood. And
my mother had been in pain for well over 6 months. I think we all now believe that she knew something really bad was wrong. We kept taking her to the doctors. all of her testing, blood work was coming back normal, but she suffered from terrible headaches. She was not sleeping, and she owned a 9-acre farm with dogs and horses, and she was always out doing something, and for 6 months she was no longer able to do those things and kept saying, I'm sick, I'm sick. So about 3 months of nonstop doctoring got us to this point. And as I shared with Sven earlier, for those 2 months after hearing that horrific diagnosis, our family laughed more than we had ever laughed. My mother was a huge supporter of my cannabis fight. At one point in my 4-year journey trying to get cannabis legalized, she offered her 9.5 acres to grow some cannabis for me. I assured her I would not allow her to do that, and her response was, what are they going to do? I'm 68 years old. And I went, Mom, they're going to put your 68-year-old butt in jail. So thank you, but no. So as supportive as she was, she had never used this product. The joy and laughter we all had in those 2 months of watching her, I'm sorry, Dr. Metcalf, get high. Her biggest question was, Diane, am I high? I can't quite feel my legs today. Not in a bad way. My back doesn't hurt at all, but I think I'm high. Do you think I'm high? We would leave full brain radiation treatment with my mom, and she would say, oh, I am so sick. And of course, we knew what worked. Mom, grab your vape. Grab your vape, smoke it out the window. Don't blow that on me, but take your vape. And within 5 minutes of vaporization, my mother would say, where are we going to eat? Are we going shopping? I'd call my sister and go, you got out of therapy, how did her treatment go? Oh, we're at the garden center. She's buying more flowers. She became a master of driving the carts at the local Walmart. So it truly gave us not only a wellness and hope, it truly gave us hope for those 2 months, because she was mowing her grass. She was driving the lawnmower all over the neighborhood. So I have to say, we talk about the wellness and the mental health. What that brought to all of us for those 2 months, we were able to keep her comfortable. We were able to keep her happy. And even though every day she told us she didn't eat much today, I can assure you the bowl of strawberries heaping with Cool Whip was a daily occurrence, usually in bed at night. But she started gaining back weight, and we really believed that we were going to win this battle. And though we didn't win the battle, I can now look back and say, thank God I had the caregiver card. I truly imagine everybody. There are 21 illnesses under our list today. That one of those 21 are going to touch a family or a friend, and you will be truly grateful to not have to phone me.
And if I remember correctly, the way that you and Dr. Metcalf started working together was with a elderly woman patient whose son got you guys together in like a matter of 12 hours or something ridiculous. You had her card and were able to provide her with cannabis within 24 hours. It was the first.
It was 24 hours.
24 hours.
And that was where PACC was created.
Yeah.
A friend at the Department of Health reached out and said, I have a desperate son, and he truly just wants to help his mother. And she's dying of cancer, and she doesn't have long. And he can't believe that we can't fast track this process for him to go and buy her medicine. And I had lunch with Shelley that afternoon, and I said, let me make a call. And I said, we have a desperate son wanting to help his mother. I was a mother fighting for my son. How could I not help this young man? So my friend Heather, who was also a caregiver with a child under the program, added Brian's mother to her card. Dr. Metcalf and Shelley went to their house the next morning and certified her because she was bedridden. And that afternoon, my friend Heather delivered the medicine to Brian's mother. They had 4 days we received text messages and PMs from Brian saying, my mother's in no pain. I keep asking if she wants her pain meds, and she keeps telling me I don't need them. Why are you trying to give me those? Give me my medicine that tastes like somebody's been cooking. And she passed 5 days later, but for those 4 days, he said, my mother was my mom again. We talked about my finances, whether or not he was going to get married, all of the things that you want your mother there to talk to you about. And I left that truly changed.
And there's a very moving video of him on your website, I believe, and he talks about how, you know, from the aspect of mental health, it was such a great closure to be able to have his mom back again for those last 4 days. Is there anything you want to tell about that experience, Dr. Metcalf?
Gee, I get real emotional.
Well,
Again, I wanted to, thank you. I want to introduce my nurse, Shelley, and my medical clerk, Kayla. They're part of our compassionate team right over here. Why don't you stand up? Shelley. Kayla. Gee, it's really made a difference for me.
Diana, let's talk some more about some of the other conditions that you see and some of the examples of improved mental health on a variety of different levels with some of the patients that you work with.
I think I shared this earlier, and Sven and I are friends, so he knows this. My son is now 18. He was not supposed to live past 10. And I can tell you, our family, my daughter is in the audience today, we lived with that every day. Ryan's worst was 400 seizures a day, thousands of seizures a month or a week. And you can't see that every day and not be physically changed by that. As a mother, as a sister, a father, you need to help and you need to fix that. And I'm only crying now today because it took us so long to get here. But today, after the use of cannabis, he is now having under 50 seizures a day. I can't even begin to tell you how that has changed our entire family. We have a 14-year-old daughter as well, and my girls learned how to count by charting their brother's seizures. So there's no explanation for the well-being of our entire family and our overall health and wellness. And I imagined and I dreamed of a day, but I truly don't think I ever felt that it would happen in his lifetime. And to see him today, he's the healthiest little boy. We go once a year for a well visit now. He used to see his neurologist every 30 days with me begging for something else to help him. There is seriously hope where we were once completely hopeless. And I will scream from the rooftops. I want everybody who is possibly feeling hopeless to understand just how hopeful this medicine is and how it may not fix everything. And I understand that Ryan will never be seizure-free due to his traumatic injury at birth, but I never imagined I'd be counting under 50 seizures a day. I can truly say it has been a miracle for my son. I watched it be a miracle for my mother, and I think everybody needs the opportunity to try this medicine.
Thank you, Diana. That was,
Thank you.
it's always moving to listen to
I always
you.
blubbers
Yeah.
then.
Thanks for sharing.
I
Go
just
ahead.
wanted to say, you've played such a huge role in making medical marijuana a reality in Pennsylvania, and I just wanted to say thank you for all of the hard work you've done and for sharing your story with us. It's so touching. It really is.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Metcalf, you've been threatening to tell us about the endocannabinoid system all day. Why don't you tell us a few things about that system that we should know?
I'll try not to be emotional, but, you know, Diane's story and that lady that I certified. Truly. Was an experience for me. Now, on an up-noted beat, the endocannabinoid system. What is that? Back in the 1940s, they discovered cabinoids. Cabinoids are neurotransmitters. Those are the chemicals that go from one part of the brain, the presynaptic, to the postsynaptic, and deliver a message to that cell to deliver to another message. That's where you get neuroplasticity, because neurons or brain cells actually learn through that process. Now, the endocannabinoid system back in 1992 was discovered by a scientist by the name of Dr. Lumar Hannes at the Hebrew University. And the endocannabinoid system is a master regulator in the body that controls your nervous system, your immune system, your endocrine system, and all the organs and all the different functioning components to try to bring it into balance. We call that homeostasis. Now, unfortunately, a lot of times when you go to physicians, they will give you a pill for an ill, but not really understanding that once you take a medicine, it also changes other structures in the body, and that's why we have a lot of side effects from medications. Now, currently, there is one medical school that teaches the endocannabinoid system, and there's 13% that teach a mini course on cannabinoids and the endocannabinoid system. In fact, interesting story, there was a professor of immunology that I certified the other day, and he was talking about all the different viruses and how he was reconnecting them all, and I said, you know, that's really not important to me. I said, what do you know about the endocannabinoid system? Didn't have a clue what I was talking about. And I'm sitting there going, this is the state of the art. This is actually what's really important, because your body has three components to that. It's got receptors. There's the CB1 receptor, which is mostly in the central nervous system, like your brain and spinal column. In fact, you have more endocannabinoids in your brain than any other neurotransmitter. In fact, they regulate the neurotransmitters. You've probably heard of serotonin, dopamine, GABA, glutamate. All of these are controlled by the endocannabinoid system. It's also present in the reproductive system, the liver, the adrenals, and also in your bone marrow. Now, CB2, which is more of the CBD component, actually is in the peripheral nervous system and your immune system, also in your lymph, your spleen, and your thymus, and that helps regulate and bring it into balance. So the thing is, when you talk about these 700 different compounds that are in medical cannabis, they go in not just with one molecule, but with a whole array of molecules that have different effects on different receptors in your body. And there's more and more receptors that we're discovering. And I'm not going to bore you with all the other components, but it's really important to know that these are the master regulator that makes everybody either ill or healthy. And the two main endocannabinoids that the body produces, one is called anandamide, which is more similar to THC, and they also have 2-AG, which is more of CBD. Unfortunately, as you start to age, or because of the lifestyle that you live, these can become dysfunctional, and when they do, then you start to develop chronic diseases, and that's where cannabis comes in, because THC and CBD can actually go back into the body and can actually start to make changes so that your body starts to now function at a much better place, including health. And that's why cannabis is so important, because in the phytocannabinoids, phyto being plant, and that's the cannabis plant, there are several different compounds. I'm sure you've heard of THC, which is a psychoactive one. You've heard of CBD, which is kind of the anti-inflammatory and non-psychoactive, but there's many others like CBC, CBN, CBG, and it just goes on and on. Now, the other speaker that's not here today, he was going to talk about terpenes. Terpenes is one of the categories that are in the phytocannabinoids, or the cannabis family, that actually provide the flavor and aroma to the actual cannabis plant. So, like if you smell cannabis that has a lemony flavor, that's from a terpene called limonene. And that is very energetic, and so is pinene. Pinene comes from pine trees, but it's also in the cannabis plant. And the cannabis plant makes terpenes to protect itself from other plants, from other insects, and also from the sunlight. So it's actually a very It's actually like 300 million years old, the endocannabinoid system. So it's developed after all of these years so that the body, all vertebrates have it, all mammals have it. And it's really important to bring your body into balance, because I think that the major problem that people develop is chronic illnesses, including mental health. If you start looking at some of the research on schizophrenia, PTSD, depression, it has to do with inflammation in the brain. And if you can modulate that by bringing down the inflammation, then you can start to reset different pathways and your body can start to heal the process. But as long as you have these problems, you can take pills till you're blue in the face. All you're doing is masking the symptoms and not treating the cause of that. Now, another thing, there are also enzymes that break down and actually make these endocannabinoids, and it's really important, but that's really typically what's in the plant itself. And there's hundreds of different compounds. And as you go to a dispensary, each grower has different strains. There's currently over 6,000 strains available. And so when people say indica, which is typically your THC, or sativa, which is more of your CBD, they've been so crossbred that that's old school. That really is not what happens nowadays. But it's a good benchmark for people so that they have an idea specifically what they're looking for. So that's how that works.
So you're seeing a day in the near future when the terms sativa and indica kind of fade away and we go more towards looking at what specific terpenes or chemical structure is there in the plant. Do you see that happening?
Yeah, actually, if you go into the latest research, especially there's a book called Cannabis Pharmacy by Michael Bax. He talks about, and Dr. Russo talks about, the fact is that when you talk about indica or sativa, and actually there's a third one called rudiolis, and there's hybrids, that's old school. That's because they're so crossbred that the compounds are not pure anymore. They've been so genetically modified that everything changes. So that's an entirely possibility. That's why when you go to these dispensaries, they talk about the compounds that are in there, and they make recommendations based upon that. But sometimes people hear indica or sativa, and they want to know about that, and so they'll discuss that as well. But that's old school, in my opinion.
Yeah. Any questions from anyone? Oh, we got a couple. Okay.
So it sounds like there's really a decent amount of research on the cannabinoids like CBD and THC. But some of the other cannabinoids that are like a little bit more less prevalent within the medicine, I feel like I haven't really seen a ton of research on some of those smaller and other cannabinoids. Although I feel that probably like using a broad spectrum of the cannabinoids rather than like a distillation of just one or two single types of cannabinoids is probably going to be like a little bit more of an effective like medication standpoint.
Yeah, that's an important point. I mean, there's a debate in the literature about isolate, which is basically just a strict product like CBD and only CBD, versus a full spectrum, or called the entourage. I'm more in the camp of the entourage effect, because when you have all of these compounds that work synergistically together, they go into the body and they start to make changes to bring back health and stability, in addition to lifestyle changes, because the body needs certain components in order to make that process work, including things like fish oil, flaxseed, exercise. These all make changes in your mind. This is just not a physical situation. This is a mind-body connection, and that's why it's so important. But yeah, the lesser compounds like CBC or CBG, they're not as prevalent, but there are strains that are much higher percentage. Like, for instance, CBN is probably one of the best cannabinoids for sleep. THCV is excellent for seizures. That's one of the big things nowadays. And you have THCA, which is like for obesity. So a lot of these compounds have effect, but when you start moving terpenes in with them, then everything changes because they all work together. Terpenes have been shown to help a lot of these compounds pass the blood-brain barrier. Otherwise, they don't get into the central nervous system. So a full spectrum is really important, and there's a really debate between hemp-based CBD and cannabis. I personally am more on the cannabis side, But there are certain companies that have bred their strains to have a lot more phytocannabinoids than just typical hemp plant, because hemp is an industrial plant and it was grown for its stalk and it's for its seeds, which is fiber, and less of the plant's energy goes to the flower and the buds, and that's why you typically have less of a phytocannabinoid spectrum, whereas cannabis is bred entirely different, its genetic structure, but that's not true across the board.
One more question?
Yeah, my question is about the blood-brain barrier and how the terpenes help to pass through that, or like bring the other cannabinoids.
Blood-brain barrier?
Yeah, how does that actually help pass through the blood-brain barrier?
Okay, if you take let's suppose you have a lot of brain fog, your memory's shot, your concentration, your ability, you have anxious, your anxiety, you're depressed. This tells me automatically that your brain is inflamed. And the reason that the blood-brain barrier is typically breached is because 80% of your immune system is in your GI tract. So when your GI tract is downregulated or is breached, called a leaky gut, then the same components that control the closure of the brain barrier are the same ones, and that opens up, and all of a sudden now you start having all these immune cells from the periphery going into the brain, creating all sorts of havoc and brain inflammation. So how terpenes help is that first is that they help a lot of these cannabinoids actually cross over the blood-brain barrier because of the chemical structure and how they work. So that's typically how that is. But you have to bring inflammation under control. Otherwise, your health journey is going to be very limited. And that's why perhaps if you take 10 people, you give them all the same product, they all have different symptoms and different responses to that particular strain or compound.
And I just wanted to add in a comment. Whenever you're talking about how many times people with anxiety, depression, and trauma, many times, I see it all the time actually, many times people also have GI issues. And it impacts that, and it's like a vicious cycle, and the medical marijuana can definitely help out with decreasing the inflammation in the brain.
Yeah, let me also say this too. The next thing I was going to talk about is there a syndrome called clinical endocannabinoid deficiency. This was coined by Dr. Ethan Russo in 2001. He had an update in 2004 and an update in 2016. Now, what he showed that there was 3 conditions that, based upon the literature, are probably direct result of your endocannabinoids being deficient or not working properly. That is migraine headaches, that is irritable bowel syndrome, which is one of the most common reasons why people go see their physician, and the third one is fibromyalgia. Now, in addition to that, they've also shown other conditions like PTSD, anxiety, failure to thrive. A lot of these also are all in that system that they're doing research on. So it's real interesting why those particular first 3 that I mentioned, how they respond so aggressively to the endocannabinoid or cannabinoids, it's because of that syndrome. And unfortunately, this is not well known by the medical community, nor does endocannabinoids. And when I mention it to them, they have no clue what I'm talking about, you know? In fact, when you go to your physician, you say, hey, listen, let's talk about cannabis. They don't know anything about it. And if you challenge them, they're going to get a little upset with you, you know? In fact, it's been my experience with pain management. They do drug screens on people that they prescribe opiates, even though in 2016 the CDC came out and said you should not check for THC. They still do. And they tell their patient that, listen, if your drug screen comes back positive for THC, we're going to drop you instantly. So these people are freaking out. You know, they're fearful. There's no reason for a physician to use that. None. Because it's a legal basis substitute therapy in this city. But you have to remember, a lot of how they make their money has to do with Suboxone, methadone. This is what they call harm reduction. They're substituting one opiate for another one. And in fact, it's the same process as if you were on opiates itself. And it's really a sad state of affairs. Whereas cannabis can actually help people go through the process of withdrawals from opiates, as well as try to reset the endocannabinoid system in your body. But it takes a trial and error. Everybody's different. What you buy on the street, recreational, is much different than medicinal, because those compounds are actually analyzed so you know what's in there, even though there are states now, especially California, that recently changed an amendment that it has to be analyzed in order to be sold within that state. Because no one has ever died from cannabis. The only time they've died from is the pesticides or the mold or the impurities from recreational cannabis. Because what happens is there's very few CB1 receptors in the brainstem. That controls respiration and it controls your pulse. So when opioids come in, they go into the brainstem, shut it down, and that's why you have 74,000 people died last year from opiates and heroin alone.
Sad, and it's really, really sad because Dr. Metcalf was talking about how Suboxone is a pretty common treatment that's used, a pretty common medication that's used. The unfortunate situation is a lot of these Suboxone clinics do not implement Suboxone treatment the way that it was originally designed to work. It's supposed to help the patient get off of the opioids, and you're supposed to be tapered off of it rather quickly. However, these patients are getting Suboxone prescribed to them for the rest of their lives.
Do we have a question here?
You mentioned migraine headaches,
Yes.
but that's not a reason to get certified for medical marijuana, is
Okay,
it?
let me just say this. In my practice, when it says chronic, severe, or intractable pain, even though intractable has been rescinded, I think that a person that has migraines, that has chronic pain, is a qualifying condition. Because chronic pain is kind of a catch-all term, as it is in many states, and a lot of different things fall under that, even though they're not specifically listed. So it is my medical opinion that a person who has migraine headaches and looking at their medications, that it is a qualifying condition.
Okay, I mean, what has the results been with
You mean as far as...
treatment with?
Okay. Right now, it's fairly new. Now, in April 2016, medical marijuana was approved in our state, but it didn't start rolling down until January of this year. And so, unfortunately, because it's a Schedule I drug, there's very few studies that have been published in order to address that specific issue. But it's been my experience that people, especially the lady that I certified the last 4 days of her life, she was lucid, where she was on fentanyl and heavy narcotics, and she's completely comatose. But now she had the ability to talk to her family, and that was really a game changer for me. Okay.
Thank you.
So our topic is cannabis and mental health. We've had a very lively discussion, very thorough discussion, I think. I want to give each of you a chance to have any final thoughts on the subject, something that was really important that we didn't talk about perhaps. And then maybe if you could mention a couple of sources that you know of where people can go on and look for more information. So let's start with you, Sarah.
So what I wanted to kind of close out with is many times people who feel like they may have PTSD, most of the time they do. And I would highly suggest if anyone, or if you know anyone, or if you feel like you may qualify, just give us a call and we can definitely schedule an evaluation, or even you can even talk to one of our counselors. We can give you a free 15-minute phone consultation to talk about symptom management, and if you have any additional questions about medical marijuana or anything like that, we'd be more than happy to help.
So I just want to reiterate, that's a very important point, that if you think you have PTSD, the chances are very good that you do.
Yes.
That's really good to know. So
Yeah.
that's also, because I've said that to a few people sometimes, and they're just like, really? Me? What? For what? You know, and they don't even understand that maybe they do have it.
Yeah.
So you've seen PTSD for all kinds of trauma.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Go ahead then.
Oh, yeah. And so we actually are constantly uploading new wellness content, natural mental health, natural addiction content on our website. That's at www.makinwellness.com. And we also have an app that has this as well. You can download it on the App Store or the Google Play Store, and you can check that out to find out future events we will be a part of.
Any particular sources on the internet besides your app and things that
yeah.
you like to research and have
Yeah.
people research?
Honestly, my favorite source for medical marijuana information is Dr. Metcalf. So, just being honest.
All right. Dr. Metcalf, any final thoughts on mental health and cannabis?
Yeah, I think, given the fact is it's still a Schedule I, and the National Institute of Drug Abuse, even though they recently came out with a semi-positive result, there's still limited research because no pharmaceutical company is going to fund a study that they can't patent. That's why you have all of these synthetic THC, like Marinol or Nabilone, and yet the government says there's no value to it, but yet they have synthetic versions of it. That makes no sense to me. And I'm just saying is that there's a couple of books that I know that are very informative. One of them is the ECS, or Endocannabinoid Companion Guide by Dr. Regina Nelson. And another one is called Cannabis Pharmacy, a little bit more in depth. They just came out with a new version by Michael Bax. And I think going back again to some websites, one of them is www.healer.com to kind of walk you through the process. There's also Leafly, which is very excellent for educational, and also Green Flower. They have a lot of interesting educational concerning the endocannabinoid system and cannabis. So I think one of the real important issues is that Pennsylvania has taken the forefront. They've allowed now 8 medical schools to start doing research on medical cannabis, whereas on a federal level, that's unheard of, because the federal will not allow you to do that. But we passed a law stating that they're allowed to do that, so there hopefully will be a lot more interesting research coming down the pipeline.
Great.
Thank you.
Diana, any last thoughts on mental health and cannabis? You're just so full of good stories. I just can't wait to hear what you come up with.
I think I share with everybody at the end of any event that I'm at, don't fear cannabis. And one of the things that Dr. Metcalf touched on is the entourage effect. We used just an isolate CBD for my son in the beginning. We saw some positive results. It was not until we did the entire plant and created an oil that way that we saw really great benefits. I do tell everybody to look up, I believe it's www.drugs.inc. Really great website to look at your current medications to see if there's interaction with cannabis. Us parents learned very quickly that one of the seizure drugs, Onfi, believe it or not, it did not do anything but increase the level of Onfi. So if you gave the cannabis too closely to the Onfi, it could increase the levels of your Onfi, which of course in some cases could have been harmful for the children. So do your due diligence, Google search. There's so much information out there now than there was 4 years ago. Give us a follow. We update every new addition to the program at www.pacompassionatecaregivers.com. And thank you for having me today, Sven.
Oh, thank you. Let's give a hand for our panelists, Diana, Dr. Metcalf, Sara.
Thank you.
And let's give a big thank you to our host, the Center of Harmony, Josh Meader over there. And to our sponsors, Saliva Wellness, Glasgow Wow, Makin Wellness, PA Compassionate Caregivers, and thanks to Diana Smith for filling in and being an emergency massage person here. So thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
That concludes part 2 of Cannabis and Mental Health. Join us again next time for more news and information for you and your doctor about medical cannabis. Thanks for listening. This podcast is a production of Mindful Medicine, LLC.